Welcome, welcome to the Empowered Team Podcast. I'm your host, Kari Schneider, and I am thrilled to be here with Randy Lyman. And Randy is so unique. I think this is going to be such a special conversation. Randy's a physicist and an entrepreneur, an emotional intelligence expert, and he has literally built multiple eight-figure companies, including an Inc. 500, and holds several patents. Now, this success is really huge. And at the same time, you're really putting an emphasis on this third element and emotional awareness and having people really get real, true, and deep fulfillment. So before we dive into more of that, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you really reach this phenomenal success that many people are just, wowed by? How did you get into the companies? And you're coming from a physicist background. So what led you down your path for all this entrepreneurial success?
Well, until 1989, about 36 years ago, at the age of 28, I was left brain. I'm going to be smart. I'm going to work hard and I'm going to find success. And I'm going to turn off my emotions because they're not going to help me. Well, then I met a woman I ended up spending 3 years with, and Maria, who I talk about in my book, The Third Element. She introduced me to the unseen side of life, the emotional, spiritual side of life. And by embracing that, I was able to find so much self improvement and clarity. And then I took a lot of the concepts I was learning and I applied them to my businesses. I already had multiple $1 million businesses, but at that point in time, I was pushing my way through things. And through learning a different way of leading, I was able to build my businesses to 30 and 40 times what they were using the principles of we're all emotional. And yes, we need to be smart. And yes, we need to work hard. And no, we should not make decisions based on emotions, but we all have emotions to feel and to work through and to heal. And when we see each other as beautiful spiritual beings on a human path together, then everything changes. And leadership from that perspective is what really brought me my success.
Wow. Okay, there's a few things that you've really highlighted here that I think are big. So number one, you talked kind of about the hustle and grind where people push and they drive and there's a very much a linear, maybe even masculine energy to it where there's this, I'm left brain focused, trying to get things done. There's a lot of thinking going on and not as much of an integration into feeling. And then you described how emotional we are. And then also that it's not necessarily that we want to make decisions from an emotional place, but really that there needs to be some sort of integration so that we can be full or whole or not just operating, but rather experiencing life. Is that's in different words, but that's some of what I heard. How does that? Am I describing it the way you experienced it, or what is it like for you?
Absolutely, Kari. So what I see is some degree of grind is necessary. Every one of us has our own decision to make as to what we give up from our personal life, if we are, in order to grind in business. But what we can't give up is integration. The only way to find success, the only way lasting success and fulfillment and a happy life is an integration of the emotional side of being human. So I still I was in the middle of the grind for a long time and I was working 80 to sometimes 100 hours a week and I enjoyed my work, so it wasn't work, but I did that doing everything I could every day to integrate the emotional side of the human experience, my emotional human experience, along with the people around me, into everything that I did. And I consider it today as the most important thing in everything I do. I'm still a scientist. I'm still logical and reasonable, and I do the work. But anytime I see a challenge, I go to what I've learned about how our challenges that we face in life, any irritation is linked back to an emotional wound that we still have an opportunity to heal.
Wow. Okay, this is big. I want to bring the listeners back to when you were experiencing what things were like before you had this 3-year real experience of figuring out more of an emotional um, awareness, if you will. So how were you operating and what was the big or maybe those small, what were the differences between how you either experienced things or did things before integrating who you were fully and after. So what was that, or was there an experience that you had where this is how I did things before and then this is what happened after, or a specific story? What was it
Yeah,
viscerally for you?
some of it unfolded slowly, and I had a few epiphanies that made a big difference. So I grew up in the 1960s and the 70s, and things were different back then. It was, here's the rules, do your job or else. And that's the way it was. Now, the same concepts that work so wonderful today would have worked then, but they weren't necessary then. It was just a matter of everybody reacted out of fear. And that's what I grew up in. So when I was a young man and I was a leader, I just pushed people to be the best they could without any consideration about their emotions or my emotions. And again, two things happened. One is, as I became aware of my own emotions, I worked through my anger, which was my surface emotion, to cover up loneliness and disappointment and those kind of things. As I became more clear over time, then I showed up more clear and calm and confident rather than tense and worried. And people respond to us differently. When we are calm and confident, then they can be calm and confident. If I walk into a room and I'm tense and guarded, then everybody I'm working with, everybody I'm leading is tense and guarded. And that's not the most effective way to be. So over time, I worked through that. And at one point in time, I fell backwards a little bit, but I came forward again and continued to evolve. And then in about 1990, I went to a 4-day leadership communication retreat. And on the third day, I had a huge emotional breakthrough around my own issues of not feeling competent in the eyes of my family. And when I had that emotional breakthrough and I went back to work 4 days later, the people at work and in my life who were incompetent and just driving me crazy, and I couldn't fix them through the mirror of my thoughts and the mirror of my actions. I was working really hard on that because Maria, my mentor, as I talk about in my book, she guided me. Everything's a mirror. Well, I had the emotional release. 4 days later, the people who were had a competence issue either became competent immediately, like magic, or they left my life. And being a scientist, I say, oh, cause and effect. I had the emotional release. The outside problem I've been working on for months is fixed. And so I said, wait a minute, there's got to be something here. So I started looking at all my challenges from a point of, okay, what underlying emotion can I deal with that might be interacting with the law of attraction? And this is proven by science, and I can speak to it at some time when we have time from a scientific perspective. But when I realized the connection, then I started to look at everything, not just from thoughts and action, but from emotional healing for myself. Eventually, I learned how to create a space where other people could also have emotional healing, or at least feel safe emotionally, so they're able to show up to work more complete.
It's so interesting because when you describe it, it sounds so logical. Like this is, oh, clearly, this makes sense for people. However, the reverse of what you were initially experiencing seems completely logical and making sense for those who are in that situation, right? So if you look back and give us an example of some of the either types of business or types of interactions that you gave the example of competent behavior and someone who was, they either left or they suddenly were
Right.
competent.
Once I worked through my own emotional wounds around competence, yes.
Right. It's not that they changed. It's
No,
that
they never changed.
your experience of the world changed, and then that experience, the result that was happening in the world. Now, what about for business? If you look at the results that you were having in business, you talked about just this exponential, this 40 times, 30 times what you'd been able to produce prior. Can you walk us through? Because for someone who, if I think of some of my clients or some of the audience, these are people who are high achievers, and some of the high achievement has come and then left them in a position of, well, why don't I feel fulfilled? Why do I feel disconnected? I've worked so hard. I've done so much, and I've achieved more than I ever thought I could. And yet here I am feeling disconnected and unfulfilled. So describe to someone what it was like in business when you went from that, basically, because it sounds like you had that type of experience.
Oh, I went from one extreme to the other, completely from one
Yeah.
extreme to the other. And in the book, I talk about some of the experiences I had where it made it clear to me that emotions were the key. But if I jump ahead to how I grew my business, it was because I changed my leadership style. Now, in order to do that and have it be genuine, I had to change myself. I had to work through a lot of emotions. It took me years. And still today, after 36 years, I hope I'm halfway through my healing, my growth. But what I did is in 1999, I fell back into old patterns. And three of my key members of my leadership team came in one afternoon and said, Randy, can we close the door? We'd like to talk. And they had an intervention and said, you're not being, they said, you're not being the best you can be. And you're coming to work stressed and it's affecting people. And we need you to look at yourself. So I went home and I talked to my wife and I said, well, they told me this. And I said, she says, yeah, I've been trying to tell you that and you haven't listened to me. So then I had to look at myself and that took a few days. And then I had to figure out how to get through my emotional releases, which again, I talk about in the book in chapter 7, 14 different types of activities we can do. And as I became more clear, then I began showing up more compassionate and caring and engaging with people in a way that felt safe for them and they felt acknowledged. So after that happened, I had to quantify what do I do differently in order to succeed. And what I came across was I need to acknowledge people for who they are. I need to help people feel like they're contributing to the cause. And I need to help people feel like they belong. So if they're acknowledged, they feel like they're contributing and they belong, then they're a lot more effective. Also, I had to learn to listen to the nth degree, not just listen and then speak back, but listen and the pregnant pause and ask, is there more you'd like to say? And put aside what I wanted and learn to listen to until that person I was listening to felt like I heard them and they had nothing else to say. And when they had nothing else to say and they felt like they were heard, then they could hear me.
Mhm.
So I learned to listen differently. I learned to identify if I'm going into a meeting or interaction and I feel stress, write it down. Did that fix it emotionally? No, but now I've separated where I'm at today and what I'm working on from this emotion that's trying to creep into my life in every way. And now I'm able to deal with it and I can deal with it later. So I learned to listen. I learned to be more aware of myself. And then I learned that people simply don't give a damn about me. So let's talk for a minute about a leader. And if you have people in your group that you're leading and you think, oh, this person, they respond to me better and you give them more attention. What happens if we reverse that? And now the people I'm leading, they look at me as one of their leaders in their life and they say, wow, I really like Randy because he cares about me and he's taking care of me. What do you think they're going to respond to best? That leader who cares about them. Now, it has to be genuine and it takes time to get to that place. But when we invest time in clearing our own emotional baggage, when we invest time into listening to people, when we invest time into approaching everything from a more caring point of view, now we have a team who hears us because they feel safe and we can encourage them to engage. We can encourage them to share their ideas and we can encourage them to help each other. That's what a real team is about. This is not about me. So in physics, the definition of power is the ability to accomplish work. Well, if I could do it by myself, I wouldn't have a team to lead, but I can't do it by myself. So in order to accomplish that work, it comes from my team. How do I get the most power from my team? By helping them show up at work, enjoy their work, feel acknowledged, feel like when I do a great job, Randy is going to recognize me and I'm going to receive praise and I get to be my best. When we create a team who has that between themselves and with their leader, then we have a winning team. Then we have a winning department. And then we have a winning business. Then we have a profitable business. Then we have more success. Then we have a better community. So it's an investment, but it pays off so well. Now, it takes a while to figure out how to do this. And I made a lot of mistakes, but I had multiple businesses and I had multiple departments. So I took a small department, there was 7 people, and I started experimenting. How can I show up differently? How can I be more vulnerable? How can I be more authentic? And how can I get them to engage? And it worked. And then I expanded that into all my businesses and grew it over time.
I love this. I think it's so powerful with it sounds like coming from vulnerability, because when you're genuine and you're authentic, that's courage to be yourself, be genuine, be authentic.
Courage is the key word. So when I show up and I say, hey, I'm not sure what to do here, guys, and I've had projects that have failed before, and I don't name names, but I have projects that failed before, and so I admit my failures. I admit I'm not sure. I ask for their help. Now I'm vulnerable. Now, an average VP in a big corporation is not going to do that, because if they fail, then suddenly they don't get the promotion, they lose their job, they get shipped off somewhere to a place they don't want to work. But when I can do that from a place of calm and real confidence and knowing, then that team looks at me and says, holy cow, this guy is so confident in who he is. He is so solid that he can be vulnerable. Now
Yeah.
people look at me differently. Now I have to have that confidence. I have to be solid. I have to be clear about how I show up. But when I am, and then I can add that level of vulnerability, suddenly my effectiveness it just goes up 3 or 4 notches, and it changes everything.
Yes, yes. And this is the thing that, like you said, the average VP, for instance, they've quite literally been conditioned either from their family, from society, from their own thoughts to believe that they can't do those things, and it costs them unknowingly.
Well, then also I want to talk about something. So us as men, boys who are becoming men in junior high and high school, we come out of grade school, everything's fun. We're with our buddies and our friends and all that. And we go into junior high, and now we have testosterone and we're trying to find our way in the bigger world. And if we show any feminine characteristics of caring or compassion or consideration or intuition, then we are attacked verbally and sometimes physically, because the other boys want to be macho and bigger, and if they knock us down, they earn points. So we learn as young men, as boys and young men, and even in high school, we have to be tough, we have to be macho, we have to push our way through. And then we come out of high school and we're out in college or the real world, and those things are not necessary anymore, but we forget, wait a minute, they're not necessary anymore. And we don't realize we can take on feminine traits. So my success has come from embracing the feminine traits available to all of us. I'm still a man. I'm still masculine. I can still protect and make decisions to set boundaries. But now I'm calling on my intuition. Now I'm connecting. Now I'm doing things. I'm taking advantage of traits that are more feminine. And that's not natural for men. And today, a lot of women that I coach, they believe they have to be completely in their masculine to lead. And the funny thing is, women already have the masculine, because they can set boundaries, they can organize, they can think, they're logical and disciplined. All they have to do is embrace their feminine side of connection with people and caring. And then they're fantastic leaders. But the world hasn't taught them that yet. The world hasn't shown them great examples yet.
Yeah, it's amazing what you're describing. You're describing to me what it sounds like is you're describing a maturing masculine that can embrace all qualities that we all have masculine and feminine within us. It's a matter of being able to embrace and tap into that, whereas we either haven't, or we've been conditioned to believe it's not good. And it's beautiful to hear. It's almost a very wise and maturing masculine that can embrace all of that. And then same for the feminine. It's a very mature and wise feminine. Women, I think, have often been, through challenge, have often been pushed into more masculine type of independence or type of traits, and then downplaying the more nurturing traits that are much needed in this day and age, and much needed in all ways.
It's always a balance.
It is.
For men and for women, it's a balance.
It is. And then to really accept and embrace that we all have masculine and feminine in us. It's just a matter of being able to be aware of that and accepting of that, and also bring whatever is needed out and practice that skill. And there's a skill that you pointed to that when you said it, I just thought, this is so critical for leaders, is so critical for everyone, but especially leaders, because they're influencing other people. And it's that, you talked about the listening, you talked about the asking, the contributing, the helping people feel like they belong, becoming more self-aware. But one of the things that you said in there was clearing our own emotional baggage. And I thought, oh, this one's so good. So can you give us some examples of clearing emotional baggage that leaders could probably really latch on to help themselves? And because the invisible labor of a leader is hanging on to is managing all this emotional stuff that other people don't realize they're carrying. So how on earth are they to clear their own emotional baggage?
Well, the first thing we have to do is set our intent. We have to set an intention. I'm going to look at myself, and I'm going to make a plug for my book again, The Third Element. In there, I share what's helped me. I share several of my stories, many of my stories, where I talk about, for example, I had a business negotiation I'd been working on for months with a major supplier, and I just felt like I was backed into a corner and I couldn't get through it. So my mentor, Maria, she says, well, let's unpack this. Where else in your life have you felt trapped? And it came back. And we don't always find back to the original event, but I did. I found the original event in the seventh grade. I was locked into a locker in the hallway. I was being bullied, thrown into a locker. They closed it. It never locked. And suddenly the lock works. And so here I am feeling trapped. And eventually I got out, but I never felt the emotions completely. So I went back, did some breath work, some breathing, present moment breath work. And I got to the emotion around the fear and the embarrassment. And once I worked through that energy, then within a couple days, this vendor negotiation that I had that was just deadlocked suddenly found a solution that worked. And so that wasn't necessarily how I was treating people, but that was how the law of attraction was holding me back. Now, with my anger, I don't remember, God, I've had to work on it 100 times because sometimes that onion has a lot of layers. Anger for me was protecting the underlying loneliness and abandonment. So if I'm having issues of trying to prove myself, it's because I'm afraid I'm going to be abandoned. If people don't approve of me, I'm not going to be included. I'm going to be abandoned. So if for some reason, my ego is saying, well, look at me, I'm good, I'm doing all these things, or I'm confident, that's ego. If I'm confident, I don't need to tell anybody. I just need to show up and do what I do. But as soon as I need to prove myself, that indicates there's an underlying wound. So EFT tapping is another thing I do. And again, in my book, in the appendix, I devoted the entire appendix for people to be able to write their own tapping exercise. I have tapping exercises I share on my website, but I want people to be able to do this on their own. This is not about selling books. I'm not doing this because I need money. I definitely don't. I want people to find ways to become more clear. So I also learned that as soon as I blame somebody, the moment I blame anybody, say, well, okay, hang on, that's me. Mirror. And I had a great podcast with somebody last week with Kelly Siegel, and he says, oh, when somebody tells me I have a problem, I carry around a little mirror and I just hand them the mirror. And so I learned that if I have a challenge in the external world, no matter how logical it is to try and change the external world, now I still set boundaries and disciplinary action, and sometimes I have to let people go and all those things happen. But if I have an irritation around that, then I have to look at myself. And I have to say, how can I feel what I need to feel? Whether I go for a walk or I work out or I do some exercise, I have to feel the underlying pain. Now, this is going to sound really odd to a lot of people, but even as a successful, mature 64-year-old man, if I have pain come up, sometimes I'll cry. Sometimes I'll have tears. I'll have emotion. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm human, because that little boy inside of me who's 6 or 7 or 14 years old, that energy's still there. Emotions are bigger than time and space. And I have no shame in that. I want to keep that inner little boy alive because that's where joy comes from, and happiness, connection with other people, creativity, finding solutions. All that is inner child. And so people are like, what the heck is this physicist talking about, this businessman? What does this have to do with business? Everything. Because it has everything to do with who we are as a human being and how we show up and how we encourage and motivate other people to be the best they can be. And that's what leadership is all about.
Mm-hmm. This is so powerful. You when you're talking about emotions and how people think of business and emotional spaces as being so separate, and what I've found and what you are alluding to is that really business is an emotional game. It's everything that everyone does is to feel a certain way.
Exactly. That's the goal. And so I never make decisions based on emotions, and we never should. And I don't use emotions to manipulate, and I don't let other people manipulate me with their emotions. We talk about it openly, but I need to be aware of my own emotions first so I can heal those. Now, some people say, well, just turn those off. Okay, great. How's that been working for you? At some point, And so I turn off the negative emotions. And then what happens? I turn off all the emotions and I can't feel happiness and joy and love and connection to the people I truly love and enjoy the wonderful days, the day off or the day with my kids or with my loved ones. So yeah, we can just turn that off, but why not instead learn how to embrace it? Yeah, it's scary as hell. For me, it was very scary and I thought it was going to overwhelm me. And at times it felt like it was going to kill me. But in the end, I became more clear. My life worked better and I enjoy every day because I'm not fighting that underlying current of, I got to stuff this feeling because it's going to get in the way of my success. And what does it do? It pushes its way into my life somehow, one way or another, when I least expect it. I'd rather do it. I'd rather do it with care and on purpose and in my own time than have it seep into my life when I'm not expecting it.
I love that description because so many people are trying to, I only want these positive emotions. I don't want any of these negative emotions without understanding that the whole emotional sphere is all of the emotions, and being able to experience all of the emotions allows the spectrum of the joy and the creativity and the playfulness and all of the things that come with the positive side. But then the negative side isn't necessarily something to be avoided. And what you've described is that it pushes back into your life unless you've
Embrace it. We have to consciously embrace it, and we have to find a practice that involves our brain, because our brain will protect us from everything except itself. Meaning, it'll protect us from physical harm, and it'll protect us from feeling all the emotions. So if we say, "Oh, I want to feel this," so let me digress for a minute. Everything in the universe fits into one of three categories, or I say three different elements. First, and in no particular order, our thoughts and information. Second, our physical body and the physical world. And third, our emotions and our feelings, which are based on our emotions, and also our emotions are based on the story we make up in the moment. So our body is only in the present moment. Our emotions have to come through our physical body because they're energy stored in our field. They have to come through as a feeling in our physical body in the present moment. And then our thinking mind is never in the present moment. It's thinking about the past. It's thinking about the future. It's a stream of thought. So if I try to heal my emotions or just deal with my emotional energy with my mind, it's never in the present moment, in touch with my body, where the emotions come through. So I can't heal my emotions by thinking about them, but the mind has to be involved or it'll hijack the process.
Yes, it's interesting. It's I love that. I love that description from a physicist kind of perspective, because it still points back to what I end up describing to people: three ways to process emotion, and that's verbally. And that engages the mind, but it also
Yes.
kind of speaks and puts out into what am I actually feeling, breath work, and
Oh, yeah.
physically. So like
Yes.
three ways to process emotion that you've talked about: going for a workout or having some exercise, breath work, and then using the flow of consciousness to become aware of the vibration in the body that might be the emotion in order to process that. And the only reason I reiterate that is because so many people have lived an entire life, not having any idea of how do I deal with this thing that's so uncomfortable called this vibration in my body. And then it ends up, you described it as it pushes back on you if you haven't consciously dealt with it, because then I described that as like a beach ball you're trying to push underwater. Sure, keep pushing it underwater, but eventually it's going to pop back up,
Yeah.
either when you least expect it or when you don't want it to or whenever.
Well,
So,
here's the other thing is, it's like anybody who has kids know that when your child wants your attention, it'll say mom or dad, and then it's mom or dad, and then it'll grab your pant leg, and then it'll go break something. It gets louder and louder until it gets your attention. So law of attraction looks at us and says, and the law of this is a whole nother subject. Law of attraction, based on science, quantum physics, double slit, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It's all being proved, and it's proven, and I've experienced it. So law of attraction creates every moment of our life, and it looks at us and says, "Oh, you have this old emotional wound, and I love you, and I want you to heal that. So I'm going to create an irritation in your world today to remind you of what you haven't felt from the past. And when we push that down, the law of attraction says, oh, you want to fight me on this? Who do you think is going to win? I am here to help you become aware of your old emotional wounds. And so the message gets louder and louder until we break down and we can't hold it off any longer. So why not be deliberate and find a way to do it on our own time and space in a way that's a little more comfortable rather than waiting for it to catch up with us and overwhelm us.
I love that. Okay, so question on that, because you've also described how it tends to come back sometimes. There's some things that you've dealt with, maybe some that are more recurring than others. And I know that for some people, they'll have something recur and they'll get frustrated because they'll feel like, well, I dealt with this. I thought that I'd put this in my past, or I thought that, this won't come back again, with that mindset of all or nothing, and that I've cleaned it up and it's all done. It's all gone away. What do you have to say about that? What is that like for you?
There's two parts of it. One is we're never given more than we can deal with at the time. So if I have a big issue, say a big onion with a lot of layers, it's pretty big. I'm not going to dive straight into the core. I'm going to become overwhelmed. I'm not going to be able to function as a human being because it's just too much to deal with energetically through the emotional energy that comes through me. And it just blows up my day or my week or my month. I'm not going to do that. And the universe doesn't want me to do that. It says, oh, let's take this as fast as you're ready to take it. So I'll get through a layer. Maybe it's a really big layer. And then it'll take me a day or a couple of weeks to process through that, to get my rest, to become integrated into the new me. So I can only take on so much at a time. And then later, that energy's still there when the time is right and the universe just it lines up everything perfectly for me. It does for everybody, I believe, but now because I believe it and I work from this point of view, it all aligns so well. So, okay, I think I have some more, let's say, deservedness issues. I have more deservedness to work through. So I go back and I do some breath work and I get a little deeper through the deservedness and I process through that. Then it might be a week later, it might be a year later, I'll go back again and I'll go to a deeper layer of the onion. Now, as you said, I've been very blessed. I've had many successful businesses. I've had a great life and I've created value for virtually millions of people through the products and services I provided. But there's still a part of me just 6 months ago that even though intellectually I knew I was deserving, emotionally, that inner child part of me didn't feel deserving. When I grew up, my parents were loving, did the best they could, but I didn't get the attention in some ways I could have. And I felt that was because I didn't deserve it. That's what the story the child makes up. So here I am, 64 years old, going through breath work, huge releases, and suddenly my world changes all over again. I went through to a deeper level of the onion of deservedness issues at the emotional level from inner child work. And what happens then? I hire 2 more great people on my team, and new podcast opportunities are opening up for me, and a lot of things change. Emotions are like gasoline in a metal can. If you pour out a little bit today and burn it off, it's gone. If you wait 20 years and you pour off another layer, it burns and it's gone. It takes a while to burn through that entire can of fuel, that entire amount of emotional energy that we're holding on to. But every time we burn some off, it's gone. That layer is gone forever. And then love replaces where that painful emotion was, because that's what we are naturally is love. We just took on stories that weren't true when we were kids and emotions that weren't helpful once the moment passed, and that pushed the love out. But when we heal, the love replaces it. And people laugh. What's that all about? What's that mean? My God, the calm and the confidence and just the amount of satisfaction that comes in life when we become more clear. There's no way to describe it. It has to be experienced. And that only comes from emotional healing.
And what would be the impact with that kind of emotional healing? It seems like we're in a world that is emotionally emotionally hurting. What do you think is there something that can be changed? Is there something that,
Oh, yeah.
so what does that look like from your perspective?
Okay, so I get excited. You're asking me great questions. I love this. So if we go back 100 years ago, 120 years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution. That's the physical world. If you go back 30 years ago, starting then, we had the information revolution. That's about the mind and thought and information. And now we're here in the emotional revolution, the evolution, final evolution of humans, where we learn to work with our emotions. We learn to become more fluid in our emotions. We learn to embrace the challenges we feel so we can find the healing and the growth. And then when we find healing and growth, we can't force others to, but we can set an example. We can be more caring. We can have more empathy for others. And that's where we at. That's where we're at in the world today. This is a time and place when there's no other way to move forward. And yes, thought and information and planning is still necessary, and taking action is still necessary. They always will be. It's a three-legged stool. We need all three legs. And now we're working on emotional awareness, emotional healing, and integrating these concepts into everything we do. Not so we can just show up and sing Kumbaya. That's not what it's about. This is about a balance. And I'm still not primarily an emotional person, but I understand the power of emotions. And that's why I always turn to that. And when I do, as I've said, my thoughts become more clear and effective, and my actions become more deliberate and more effective. And it's this balance and this evolution that we're experiencing now. More people are talking about what I've been saying for 30 years and what I put in my book. This is the time for us to embrace our emotions, not so they overwhelm us, not to make decisions, but because to me, it's the most important part of our human experience. And as you said earlier, why do we educate ourselves and work hard? So we will feel good.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, exactly. How does this, how we're now into an age of AI, and with artificial intelligence, we're really seeing changes that are happening very quickly and are likely going to happen exponentially more quickly. Where do you see all of this with AI's impact on people?
We have three different components with regards to intelligence. We have human intelligence, which is the thinking mind, which is more creative than AI will ever be, most likely, and more touching. So we have the human intelligence, we have artificial intelligence, which says we're going to take these humans' perspective of problem solving and we're going to group together a million or a billion minds worth of power into a computer. And then we have infinite intelligence, that higher part of ourselves that we connect to through intuition. So if I can show up with my human intelligence, I can use artificial intelligence. I can then also call on infinite intelligence through my intuition, and through my human brain, I can find a balance of all three of these with feeling and intent of adding good to the world. And that's kind of the fourth component. Now I can do amazing things with artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence on its own, I've seen people who just rely on that, and pretty soon they lost their own human intelligence and they don't think anymore. And it's a crutch that they're so dependent on, they can't do without it. And AI is not necessarily always going to be free. This isn't something that anybody owes us. We are right now training these people who own AI. We're training their machines how to control us. Now, I'm going to continue using AI, but I'm also always every day going to turn to my own experience, and more importantly, the infinite intelligence I have access to through my intuition.
That's very it's very powerful because and I like how you've described it, because one of the ways that I describe it to people when they're apprehensive about using AI is that, well, you realize that it's learning from us, and it could be, if there are amazing people with amazing emotional intelligence or awareness or gifts to offer, if it's not learning that from us, then it's going to be limited in how its intelligence represents human intelligence as well. So if it's its own separate thing, what you're speaking to, it sounds like, is our higher level, our spiritual level, our ability to tap into something that's greater than our own brain, greater than artificial intelligence. And it's, sounds very meta in a way of being able to witness what if.
Einstein talked about it, and he said a brief statement he said, which is creativity, human creativity, whatever words he used, I don't remember, is so much bigger than information and science. It's where science came from, is our creative understanding and how we experimented and made up these stories and figured out what's what. And that infinite intelligence is always going to be bigger than any bank of computers. I believe in the unseen. I'm a scientist. I've run into so many limitations, like solving a computer hardware issue or software issue. And I just say, okay, I don't know what the answer is. And I ask my intuition to give me the answer, and an answer comes out of nowhere. Now, is that absolute scientific proof? No. But after experiencing it hundreds of times, and after experiencing answers from my intuition tens of thousands of times, making multi-million-dollar decisions based on my intuition, I trust it.
Mm-hmm. And
I
when
had to
you,
cultivate that. I had to cultivate that. It took time to learn to really hear what is my intuition, what is my ego, and what are my emotions. And I talk about this in the book, How to Tell Which is Which. But once we know, then every one of us has access to that higher intelligence.
describe that for us, because you've described your ego, your mind, your brain, your intuition. So are you getting quiet? Some people get quiet. They are you tapping into a certain area that you are thinking about, like maybe your heart or your gut? Or what is it like for you when you've practiced this? What's your experience of tapping into your intuition when you're coming up against something?
Well, it's natural for me today. If I go back to 36 years ago when I first started learning it, when Maria introduced me to my intuition, I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean I have intuition? You got to be kidding me. So she said, well, let's do it by, instead of knowing what you're going to see, let's figure out what you want to see. So she say, think of something you want to see: a blue feather, a orange butterfly, a parking space, an open parking space. That's a fun game to play. So I started visualizing these things, and they'd show up in my life. And then that same place where we breathe and we imagine the future, it's a little different, but now instead of imagining and pushing out the future we want, we say, what do you have to show me that's coming? And it's kind of through that same portal. It's an emotional portal. It comes through our body in the present moment, comes through thoughts, colors, words, information. Some people hear voices. And so when we get used to asking for what we want and talking to the unseen, then the unseen, the infinite intelligence and our intuition, speaks to us. So it's a silly game to start out of asking for what we want, finding a way to listen. Now, some people can sit still and meditate better than me. I have to move to meditate. I'm riding my motorcycle, I'm walking, and then I'm clear and I get my answers. So start small, play with things that are not important. And here's the key: intuition will never argue for its point of view. It will never try and persuade us of its position. It gives us information. And because it's higher information, it has to give us our free will. So it cannot give us a reason. It cannot persuade us. So it says, turn right. It didn't say turn right because this is the best route or it's safest or it's fastest. It just says, turn right. Now, our emotions say, oh, turn right or else this bad thing will happen. Or I need to be there on time. And then our mind says, well, turn right for all these logical reasons, or turn left for all these logical reasons. But our intuition simply says, here's the message. And that's it. So when we can learn the difference between our quiet intuition, that little wise whisper, versus something that's arguing for its point of view, then we can start to tune into that intuition. Now, one way I practiced originally that I still practice today, and this one's fun. Any restaurant I go into, I open the menu. Sometimes I'll look to make sure I'm not in the dessert to start with. That's fun. But so I look at the menu and I'm in the entrees or I'm in my appetizers, like, what do I want? Whatever speaks to me off that page and jumps off of that page, that's what I order. Now, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I'm going to get a bad meal? Probably not. Sometimes I'll look at something, oh, I want to order this. Well, God, I don't know. That doesn't sound right. My intuition just quietly says, this is the right thing to order. And I ordered, it's amazing. So try that. Try a menu, whatever it is, what flavor milkshake you're going to get, something, and say, okay, how am I going to drive to work today? Am I going to take this route or that route? On things where there's no risk, that's how we practice.
Safe, fun ways to practice, basically. I want to be aware of time here. So when we're going to wrap up with a couple of things here. You're such a dynamic human being. You've had so many incredible life experiences. You got, riding motorcycles off-road in the background of your life. You've got, you're in the desert, you're restoring classic cars. You've got so many neat things going on. To tap into your wisdom, what would be a piece of advice that you'd like to impart on others, or maybe your younger self would have loved to hear from you? What is a piece of advice that you'd like to offer?
We don't have to do everything perfectly. If we're building airplanes or medical equipment, yeah, it's important to be perfect. But if we're working on personal healing and growth and how am I going to improve and how am I going to show up as a leader, caring and intent matters more than perfection ever will. So be willing to make mistakes, be willing to admit your mistakes to yourself at least, and be willing to deal with the messy things that are part of healing and growth in the human experience. Perfection is not the answer. The mistakes that we're willing to learn from lead us to the best answers.
I love that. That's beautiful. Now, I want to point people to where you are and also your book. You have a wonderful book that you've mentioned, The Third Element. What can people find in that book for helping them through some of this?
What they're going to find is an understanding of what I'm speaking about here today. And I break it down in the book down to the nuclear level, to the quantum level, not just general people's spiritual use of the word quantum, but I actually explain it with scientific examples that are easy enough for people to understand. I share my own stories. And so people read this and say, well, Randy's an intelligent guy. This makes sense. Maybe I'm interested. And then I tell them how. Like I say, in chapter 7, there's 14 different activities. There's tapping exercises. There's explanations. So people can understand why. They can understand how to do it. And hopefully it gives them some inspiration to say, okay, this may work. I'm willing to give it a try. And the reason I wrote the book is I've already done this. This works. And I want other people to have a better life. I want other people to find connections with the people they love. I want them to experience the success that they have not been able to reach yet. I want them to find the better health. And so we all have the opportunity to improve our lives. And I've been blessed, and I'm just trying to share some of that blessing with the rest of the world.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And people can find you at randylyman.com. You're on LinkedIn at Randy Lyman as well. And I think Instagram as well. We'll make sure that your links are in the show notes so people can find you. And we are very blessed to have you on this show. Thank you for sharing everything that you've shared with us.
You're welcome, Kari. It's a pleasure.